I didn't even like sake that much, to be honest, until I had my very first unpasteurized sake, which is Namazake. And unpasteurized sake has a lot more kind of natural, earthy flavors. And just my first experience realized, wow, sake could be so flavor rich.
Most sake that comes in the US has been heat pasteurized twice, once in the tank and then again in the bottle. And that's to make it shelf stable so it can go all over the planet and not have to worry about keeping it cold. Unpasteurized Namazake, you have to keep cold because it's live. We have not killed any of the yeast, any of the enzymes, so they're constantly changing because it should be treated like fresh food. It is really fresh.
We wanted to make more local sake using local ingredients. So thought we'll try it with local Californian rice first.
For me, that was a key aspect to be able to have control of our rice from the paddy all the way through to the bottle. California has a long history of rice cultivation.
Sake can be produced from what's considered table rice, but for the premium types of sake, there are specific attributes that are of interest. Those include having what's called a white core. This is called shimpaku in the Japanese language. Because the market is table rice, milled white rice, the attributes that they are looking for actually are translucent kernels, ones that don't have this white core, whereas people who are interested in sake brewing varieties would like to retain that feature.
My friends in the sake business in Japan, they have a wide variety of rice they can choose, and they blend back different rice to create a new product, and you get all these flavor profiles out of it. I'm really limited, so it's really, really important for me to get this rice right.
I'm just happy if I can just keep doing what I enjoy now, as long as I can keep working. You remember all the happy memories and all the hard work, and see, okay, now, it's something that we go into, send out to the world, and feel all these hard work and struggles, everything was worthwhile.
Hi, welcome to the Sake Brewing Seminars. We got an amazing member with us today who just celebrated 10 years as a sake brewer in San Francisco. He's here to talk about rice growing and production, mistakes, and how to fix those mistakes. So before we get into that, I want to tell you about some exciting information. So brewsake.org, the international group of sake brewers that provides these seminars, the one that creates recipes, brewing calculators, resource lists, publishes the articles you read on the science of sake brewing, run the weekly calls every Tuesday. Feel free to join. And that moderates a chat server for you to troubleshoot and learn from each other, is announcing the formation of the Sake Brewers Guild. This is a project that has been almost 4 years in the making. Ultimately, we believe that learning to make high quality sake should be open and accessible to everyone. Our mission is to create an inclusive organization focused on advancing sake brewing best practices by teaching and supporting technical excellence, facilitating the open exchange of knowledge among participants at all levels. So this isn't like a commercial thing, homebrew thing, at all levels. And removing the barriers to learning, including language, processes, and access to those raw materials that, of course, we need in order to do this. So we saw that other organizations were focused on marketing or legal reform, others on retail, consumer education, but nothing was answering the questions that a lot of us as brewers were looking for. Those scientific, those um, you know rubber hits the road type questions. So there are hundreds and maybe thousands of you out there that have come to our site. Um, Trying to learn this extremely difficult form of fermentation, and we intend to help you achieve your goal. So if you are a brewer starting your first brew or a commercial brewer looking for some help, come join the Sake Brewers Guild at brewsake.org/guild. Cool. And with that being said, let's move on. Today's topic: rice mistakes and recovery. Our guest today is Jake Myrick. We're going to get all the brewers' pronunciations correct on this seminar series. Um, Co-founder and brewer at Sequoia Sake. Jake, I'm going to up on screen here. Welcome. Um,
Hey.
thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. I know you've been doing this for a while, and you just celebrated. Correct me if I'm wrong. You just celebrated 10 years, correct?
We have been making sake at this location for 10 years. With
So-
that said, I've been working on growing rice for 14 years in
oh
California.
my God, that's incredible. I hopped back up here with you. So uh, so let's do this. Yeah, why don't we actually get a little bit of background? So, Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about your, how you got into this, why you chose sake, how you got into sake, and why don't you throw this in there too, because I am kind of curious why San Francisco. So give us a whole introduction here.
Well, first, thanks for having me here. I'm glad you took time out from your Olympic viewing and came to watch me. I appreciate that. Um, I've been living in California since, let's see, 1986. Yeah, I'm really old. Um, Moved to Japan in 2000, spent 10 years there, came back to San Francisco where my wife and daughter and I have a home. And we started making sake a little after that. So in the garage, and then took about 4 years before we figured out, how to make it commercially. That's kind of the story in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's great. And 4 years, I think that's actually a great window there. That really establishes for people, when you're working through this and trying to know the ins and outs of sake brewing. I think sometimes people jump to this conclusion of like, I'm going to learn this. A couple weeks later, I'm going to be full out into production. So it's a great. The more stories we hear from people, and they really give that realistic timeline of, well, if you really want to do this, and you want to be professional or you want to go this route, it's going to take a while. So chill out, and we'll get there. Um, so in that vein, let's talk about what is something that you might have learned as a brewer that has changed about the way you thought about the sake brewing process, right? So you started off thinking, okay, this is what sake brewing is, and now that you've been doing this for a while, is there anything that stood out to you as like, oh man, I never considered this is how to think about it, or
I think that happens every day. I mean, every day we find something and we said, "Oh my God, we've been doing this the wrong way. We should have been doing it this way."
sure,
But no, no, no. I mean, I think that's the only way you can learn. So half my family are artists. That's their whole profession. My other half of my family is all educators. So you paint and then you realize, oh, I didn't paint that right. Let's go find someone to help me teach it. So this is kind of the way I was brought up. So you're always looking at it like, how do I improve? What do I need to change? What I think was the biggest difference when I got back and started actually saying, I'm going to do this commercially, I didn't realize that 25 days, once I start, I'm at the brewery for those whole 25 days while I am brewing. I really
yeah.
did not realize that. That's the piece I think just kind of hit you, because I was in the IT business. So we had vacation. There's no vacation in sake making. None. Zero.
That sounds like a what's that A League of Their Own? There's no vacation in sake. Uh,
It's true. It's true. Even all the technology I'm using is still, you still got to come in and take them
yeah,
samples, you know?
totally. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's a really insightful point. Um, so there's a couple other questions I could ask you here, but this is kind of interesting because you're always doing something. Is there anything that you're currently experimenting with? And I feel like there's an easy answer to this you could give me, which is the topic of our of our topic today. But is there anything other than rice that you're experimenting with? You feel like
Ah,
you're working on?
well, just it's kind of in the slide presentation I have here, but we're a family business, you know, so
Mm,
I'm not the chemist in the family. So my daughter is.
mm,
She makes sake here. So I've been working with rice, like I said, since 2010. I've been working with UC Davis, trying to get the rice because I knew that was important. So I spend a lot of time with farmers and researchers and things like that. But I did not spend a lot of time on the water and all the basic mechanics of sake
mm.
making. So we did project with Arrowhead Water, which is one of the biggest water companies here, bottled water companies. And that kind of sparked my daughter's interest in water. And that's a rabbit hole onto itself. So we have now done many different water only sakes from different water sources and just trying to explain why they change. And it's not just the chemistry in the water, it's a whole nother aspect to the water. And yeah, so that's kind of a rabbit hole we're in right now.
It's a great rabbit hole. It really is. I think Todd might touch a little bit on water chemistry in his presentation next month. We'll have to see, um, because I know he did a lot of that with beer, and he's been surprised how few sake brewers are really adjusting water chemistry to hit various textures and even fermentation profiles. So it should be interesting. But I don't know how much we'll get into it. Um, Great point though.
Yeah.
Um, I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. I'll be pinging you. Don't worry. What is your favorite bottle or style of sake?
You know, bottles and styles change. So I started with Nama, which is my favorite style of sake. That's what got me going because I couldn't find Nama Genshu here.
Mm,
And again, this is 2010. There wasn't a lot of that around. It's much better now. But it I don't look at it that way. I look at it more as where am I and who am I with and what am I drinking.
mm.
So when I go camping, I like our jalapeno infused sake because you're sitting there by the fire and you're drinking these little shots of jalapeno. You know, it's just amazing. You know, our wasabi infused sake, and we're cooking some clams and you pour them into the warm shell and you drink that. Oh man, that's just awesome. So, it really more like that. So I think about, how does the food or location influence what sake or style of sake I would like. Um,
That's a great answer, Jake. You even managed to slip a promo in there. That's fantastic. All right.
we're selling a
Uh,
lot of wasabi sake right now.
I'm gonna cut you off before you keep going. Oh, wait. We're about to let you speak for another hour. Okay. So, Jake, we're gonna throw your slides up and let you get into this. It's good to get to know you a little bit. I think for those that haven't met you, you have quite a personality, and I think it's fantastic. It shows in a lot of how you guys express yourselves through your bottles, your labels, and everything. There's a lot that's there, and the three of you working together really is a fantastic team. So, with that being said, let's. I'm going to throw your slides up now, okay? And you
Thank
can
you.
take it away.
Appreciate that, Lucas. So, like Lucas said, I'm Jake from Sequoia. A lot of people ask us where we came up with that name. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out that name because we wanted to make sure people knew that we were actually making sake in America and we weren't a Japanese sake brewer. We still had a lot of people in the beginning saying, "So where are you making this sake in Japan?" And we had to tell them, "No, we're actually making it here in California." Um, Next slide here. So this is the three of us. So that's me on the right. That's my wife and partner, and that's my daughter over there. My daughter studied sake making for over 2 years and is the chemist in the family. She's also becoming a food scientist. She makes two sakes for us. Noriko and I have been working on making sake for, like I said, 10 years, but together we've been drinking and consuming sake for way, way more than that. So I'm actually coming from the IT world. I had started about 10 different companies, and one of the companies I started was in Tokyo back in 2010.
And luckily for me, I was able to travel all throughout Japan and visited somewhere between 100 to 200 different sake breweries, mainly because I like drinking it. I wish I had known I was going to actually do this, because then I would have asked more important questions. But visited a lot of people, got to know a lot of people in the industry. So when we came back and decided to do this and couldn't actually do it as effectively as I liked in the garage, we went back and forth from 2010 to 2014, studying at all these different small sake breweries. One of the key pieces that I recognized from the IT world was we broke up the disciplines. So there was actually a third partner, and he's the guy who built everything. Noriko studied mainly on the koji, and she continues to go back to Japan every year and go to a different brewery to learn koji making. So that's was it 14 plus years she's been just doing koji training every year except for the COVID. I spent most of my time learning about all the rice, fermentation, marketing, and things like that. And the third partner was the guy who built everything. Back in 2014, there was no sake industry here. The Ita wasn't producing any gear, so we actually had to make our own steamers, make our own tanks. Press was the only thing we decided not to make because it was a little bit dangerous. But in 2010, when I started this, I recognized right away when I was talking back to these guys, going back and forth, and they said, you know, you're getting the process down, but one of your biggest hurdle is always going to be the rice. Americans don't have sake rice, and we didn't. We only had table rice. You know, California has been growing rice since 1912 commercially. And it has always been rice to feed people. It's not been rice to actually turn into sake. So that's where we started this journey, really, really looking at it and trying to figure it out. But before I go too far into that, just give you guys some reference of what kind of a brewery we are. So again, it's just three of us making the sake, but these are the kind of our equipment that we have. We're 2,500 square feet facility. We have 5 fermenters, 2 bright tanks for doing clarification, 3 shubos for doing different types of starters and different test batches. We do have the Funet that I really, 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 really like our Funet. It's just incredible. We are using all the water from the city. The city actually gets the water from one water source, which I don't want to get into the water. It is my kind of, mind-bending piece right now but we are using water that's coming from Hetchy Hetchy, which is Yosemite. So it is all mountain water, but we still actually filter it. And we have one koshiki for making our rice, cooking our rice. We always need a good washing machine. I cannot tell you, you need a good washing machine and a good ice maker. No, it all seems funny. People always ask me about that, but those 2 things are used almost every single day. Just for some references, in the last 10 years, we've made 185 commercial batches. That's how much we've actually made to sell. We've made many more of test batches. That turns into 122,000 pounds of rice milled at ginjo level, which means 60% of the kernels left. So that's quite a bit of rice that we've gone through. The other piece that I always think is interesting, and a lot of people don't think about it, is how many times you actually touch the batch. So my hands physically touch every single batch 308 times. And you think about it, that's from unpacking the rice, weighing the rice, washing the rice, soaking the rice, drying the rice, making the koji, cooking the rice. I mean, it really adds up very, very quickly. So when you start thinking about how large a facility you're going to make or how much sake you want to make, you need to step back and say, okay, how much time is it going to take to actually do that when you have to move that much pounds of rice? Who knows how likes to look at this? So we have our portfolio sakes, our seasonal sakes, and our special sakes. The top ones there, the animals, those are all our namas. The Sequoia, the colored triangle ones there, those are our coastal, those are the bottle pasteurized versions. We have sake that we put into wine barrels. We have sakes that we infuse, and then we have some special sakes, which are fun. It's a lot of sakes, a lot of SKUs to keep track of. We sell commercially in retail probably about, let's say, I would say probably 10 of those at all the time. So that's why we're producing sake all year round. So every month we have 2 fermentations going at all times, and that changes every second month. It's 3, and every 2.5 months, it's 4. And right now I have 8 tanks going right now. So to keep that many SKUs, I would not suggest you start out with that. I would suggest you start out with a few. We started with 2, 3, and that was what we stayed with for the first couple of years. Okay, let's get into the rice. So what is our goal? Immediately after going back and forth, like I mentioned, I knew we had to get better rice. And these are the things that I think are still missing is, the rice research and development of specific varieties. That was really, really key. So I was talking to, I'm lucky in California, we have 2 different organizations that actually do rice research. And then we also have UC Davis that does also rice cultivation and research, but they all focus on specifically making rice that's better to eat or makes it better for farmers to grow to make rice better to eat. So it took me quite a bit of time to convince these 3 different organizations to actually think about making rice for fermenting. That's really the key for their perspective is what we're doing is fermenting the rice. And the growth of fermented foods has turned this from what was really a hard sell 14 years ago into something that people are actually paying attention and listening about. The next piece was education of farmers. It grows differently. You grow sake rice very, very differently. It grows longer. It needs more water. You take it off the paddy at a higher moisture rate. Then you have to dry it, a slower process. Every one of those steps needed to be educated. And that's probably been my biggest hurdle is to actually get everyone on board to that it is not just eating rice. It is not just getting done as quickly as possible. There's actually, I will pay a higher price for a more quality product. We really have got some great partners that have really come along with us in that. The next piece here is sake brewing. Educating rice in sake brewing from table rice to sake rice handles totally different, not just in how it ferments, but how it cooks, how it washes, how you touch with it, how you interact with it. All those things really, really make a big difference. So I probably spent, I don't know how many hours, months, just learning how to cook rice. My daughter, when she was over there doing her training, she was spending about 2 months just cooking rice. That's all they let her do. You could only cook rice. Typically, they'll spend a whole year if they know that you're going to be working at their place. But they knew she was coming back and she was going to have to get on the fast track. So they did it in 2 months versus a full year. And that is really, I think, a key to a lot of people miss. We're coming from a bread culture. We don't think about rice. Rice cooking is really, really, really key to the whole process here. You can make so many mistakes, and we're going to talk about those. But the biggest one I've heard so many people starting out in the garage is they actually boil rice. That's what you do at home. You do not boil rice, you steam rice, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's really, really key in terms of the moisture. So everything about rice, everything about sake is about how much moisture the rice gains or does not gain. That's really, really key from when it's coming from the paddy all the way through to the end product when you're pressing it out. So again, my rabbit hole with the rice is to follow where it came from. So back in 1906, Japanese citrus farmers came to California. And they brought 2 different rice varieties. They brought rice to eat, table rice, and they brought sake rice. They actually came from, where was that? Aizu, Matsu, in Fukushima. We actually DNA'd our rice back to them. So they actually brought that rice over here. And in 1912, UC Davis planted the first commercial field. And this rice, we DNA'd it back to, it was actually wataribune, and we can talk about whether wataribune is omachi or omachi is wataribune, or wataribune, it came from certain parts of Japan. This one we DNA'd, it actually came from Hokkaido via, Fukushima. So that doesn't really make much of a difference for us on this side, but it does in Japan, because the last time that rice was grown was the turn of the century. So we actually have a strain that they have not been growing since the turn of the century in Japan. Why did they grow it? They started growing it mainly to feed the Chinese laborers who were doing all of the railroad construction. And it wasn't until 1920 when others started eating it besides just the Chinese laborers that they actually started crossbreeding it. So Calero, that green part right there, that was really the predominant rice all the way up until we get to 1940. Okay, 1940 was when they really started creating all kinds of different varieties. This is another piece I think gets lost in translation. When you go to buy rice, they say you're buying Calrose. There are so many varieties of Calrose, and I'm going to show you they don't all react the same way when you're brewing. They may taste the same to a lot of people, but they do not actually work the same at all. Okay, everyone's seen these slides before. The key piece here is on the left side there, the sake rice versus table rice. Sake rice is smaller rice. Calrose is a medium grain. Table rice is a medium grain. Sake rice is a small. The big piece everyone always talks about is the starch core. That's really important, but starch is the most important part. If you look at the table rice, there is starch there, but it is all over the place. And when you're making koji, koji needs space to actually create the enzymes and sugar inside the starch. So what makes Yamada Nishiki and Wataribune really special kings of sake rice is the center of the crystalline structure of the starch. That really changes the whole way it can produce those massive amounts of sugar. The other big piece here is how you can actually grind off the outside of the rice and make sure it doesn't break. That's really, really key for the koji making process also. Proteins, that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could get into. I'm going to kind of gloss over that for right now because we really don't have that much we can do about it. It's really pretty much based upon what the farmers have available to plant for us or what the big sake millers are going to give us. So right now they've changed their rice. We used to be able to use M205 and M206 up until about 2022, and now we're on M10 and M211, and all those make a big difference in terms of the resistance to pesticides and resistance to bugs, but it actually changes the whole starch structure for us as brewers. And there's nothing we can do other than actually create our own varieties and grow those so that we can bypass that problem. I'm just going to quickly go through this. Everyone knows rice has a husk. You remove the husk, you have brown rice. Brown rice is not a different variety of rice. It's just rice that's not been milled. You remove the brown part, which is just a fraction of the rice outside, and then you have table rice. It's anywhere between 90 to 88% left of the rice. Futsu sake, you remove another 30%. That still is leaving some of the minerals, some of the oils, so it still gives it off flavor. Pretty much for us is the demarcation place is ginjo level. That means you have to remove at least 40% of the outside. And again, we can get into some nitty-gritty details. If you look at the left side there, sake rice is smaller and table rice is bigger. So if we're using 40%, which one are we measuring? Do we still have more starch with table rice? Yes, you do, and we can talk about that. And it's a different complication on top of the whole things. But for this video, this presentation, we're just going to kind of leave it right there. We're just going to go with what everyone talks about as ginjo and just say that it's ginjo. We're removing 40%. It's still getting rid of the oils, the fats, the minerals, the vitamins, all the things that can give you an off flavor. So you really want to get rid of those if you can afford to. If you can't, there's other ways you can get around it. And I'm sure that Todd will talk more about that in his presentation. And that's because that's the end game. That's not actually at my side on this over here where you're pre-fermenting. Daiginjo, you're removing 50%. Just for reference for everybody. So Sun Valley, who we work primarily with, they gave me the numbers. It takes about 20 hours to do ginjo. Okay, it's milling in the machine for 20 hours. To remove just that 10% more to do daiginjo, that's 40 hours. So you're doubling the amount of time. So that is why one of the reasons why ginjo and daiginjo are different price points. It's really, really key. Both have their place. We just tend to do a lot more ginjo than daiginjo. Okay, nitty gritty here. So when we got started, 2014, we were buying rice off the open market. So again, I mentioned before that Cal Rose is a variety of different rices. Um, so M205, M206, and M105. M105 was actually one of the original rice that was used to make sake in Hawaii. I love 105 if you can get good 105. It's just really, really difficult to get good 105 right now. It's not been in circulation for a long time. Our primary rice was M205. If you ask the rice researchers, M205 was actually developed to grow north of Sacramento, and M206 was developed to grow south of Sacramento because those climates are a little bit different, mainly about the water, not necessarily about the length of the day or anything like that. And they say that they taste exactly the same. I don't know about tasting exactly the same, but they do not function the same. M205 is by far superior rice for making sake. Um, so you can see that in 2015, we contracted our first farmer and did 105. It was acceptable. I liked it. It just left us a lot of lees at the end of the day. And we also did 206 and 205. And 205 was by far the superior of the threes that we were testing on that. So that's kind of where we stuck from 2015. We went down that path with using that variety of cow rose. So again, I am growing it with organic farmers, and I am milling it at 2 different locations to get my rice. So I've now increased my headache of following this to get the rice that I wanted. And for us, it was all about the source and control. So I wanted to control my actual rice. If you look at up there, when you got a mixture of rice, and it's still to this case today, is it will actually change in terms of its soak time from every time I go and grab out of that bag. And that was one of the big pieces for us. We wanted stability. I also wanted to be able to control the actual moisture off the patty, which then allows me to control my koji process, my soaking process, many steps that were much more of a headache. We were able to control those. So we started from 2015, and as you can see, we've stuck with that for quite a while. We did try some Yamanishiki back in 2016. That was probably our only area where we tried a little bit of that. It wasn't to our liking, so we quickly moved away. It was also a little bit more expensive for us at this point. M401 was also a old variety of rice, grows very tall. We liked it. It was really, really good flavor. But again, just like 105, it produced too much of the lees at the end of the day, which made it commercially not viable for us. It was just too much of a cleanup process. We switched over to our organic in 2018, and that was really, really big change for us. Again, we then tried a little bit more of the Yamanishiki. This was California. It was okay. Again, the expense was probably what kept us from not going down that path. And we headed over in 2019. We got approval for our rice. Again, I've been working with UC Davis to resurrect the original rice brought over from Japan in 1906, and that took 9 years to get approved from all the regulations. So that's what we started using in 2020. Wasn't the best in some aspects, but the flavor and the quality was really, really good. The integrity of the grain was not so good. We found out that it was going to take about 3 years to acclimate the rice from where it was being grown for seed at UC Davis to the new farmer's place. It takes about 3 years for it to acclimate to the new environment, even though it's less than 50 miles away. Again, we tried some Yamada, and then we tried some Calrose, and then we also tried some Omachi. The Omachi was coming from another resource that we had. The Omachi worked really, really well. We liked it, and we planted that. So that's actually been planted, and we're working to acclimate that to its new environment, and that's probably going to be happening next year. Who's got the rice? Yeah. So we have Sun Valley out here in California. Farmers Rice Co-op, which is actually part of the EDA group, and Isabel Farms. That's pretty much the only players that are actually milling and growing rice for sake making. Variety, selection, pricing, availability, rice quality, milling, all these things go into our formula when we're choosing rice. And that's why we really went out of our way to actually get our own rice so we could control and make sure that it's a single source, single location. One person is responsible for actually growing it. One person is actually responsible for the seeds, so we can follow the whole chain down the way. The other big thing is, which I've been an advocate for, is we need to have a better understanding of how we actually mill the rice and a better relationship that actually controls from the rice grower to dryer to the milling, so it's more to our needs than always the big guys out there. Enough about that one. What do you need when you start growing? These are our typical tools. So the rice washing bags, I've been using a lot of different bags. These bags are by far superior for washing. We don't have a rice washing machine because we don't have water pressure. So we wash our rice by hand. And these bags are really nice. They do a great job, but they also clean up really nice. A lot of times I'll tell people that are getting started in the business, you know, it may not always be the best bag or the best quality for this if you have to spend hours and hours cleaning up afterwards. So you want to think about it as a whole process. The rice steaming cloth, another big one. The wooden mat. So we always take our rice and put it into the black bucket, and we always put our rice in the walk-in cooler. That's just to keep it from getting any mold or anything growing on it. And we've heard some sad stories about that before. And weighing, you want to have a good scale to weigh that. What we do have here, though, is the rice dryer to actually get the water out of the rice after we've actually soaked it. That is really key. We didn't spend a lot of money, but we did spend some money on that to make sure that that works well. This is where we wash our rice, actually in the sink, 3 tub sink. So we have one for washing it, one for soaking it, and then we use the buckets for actually soaking the rice, and then we rinse it out. It's really labor intensive, but it's made a big difference for us. We just like to control exactly what we're doing. So it really, really is key for us to actually do that. And the consistency, everything about rice is for us consistency. So you want to make sure that each bag has the exact same amount of moisture gain. You really also want to make sure that you're always measuring your moisture of the rice. The rice millers probably will tell you, but every rice miller has a different way that they measure their moisture inside the rice. So it's worth buying a moisture detector and checking it out yourself. Also the steps. We formulated the steps to make sure that we do this. So you're always rinsing the rice or hydrating the rice before you get started in terms of washing it. Then you're washing the rice. You're actually physically moving the rice around, or you have the machine pushing water through there. And then you have another spot where you're actually cleaning out the rice. And then you're soaking it. And then you're drying it. So there is a staging process going through there. And each brewery has a different way that they do it. It's all kind of the same way, but you want to figure out what works best for you in terms of, you know, what you're doing in your flow and your workspace. And that really, really, you want to actually write this down and actually try to practice it and make sure you're consistent. When it comes to rice, consistency is really, really key when you're getting started. So, you know, we have records going back 10 years. They're not neat, they're not clean, but they're legible. You can see what date, you can see the rice, you can see what the process was, you can see who did it, you can see your target, you can see the time, and you can go back through this and you really, really check it. And no matter who's doing it, you can see what's going on and you can see the trends. And this is really, really key to actually a better understanding. And I don't say we go back and look at it all the times, but I think it's just a process of getting you in the process of checking the data. When you write the data down, you're going to remember it a little bit better. And I don't know how often you guys are all making sake. We make sake almost every single day. And I'm washing rice almost every single day. So this is kind of second nature to me at this point. But record keeping is really, really, really key. Um, you really, really want to try to keep, again, it doesn't have to be fantastic, immaculate records. You can see they're not, but you have the records there so you can go back when there's a problem and say, well, okay, what did we do different for this batch or that batch? And that really has made a big difference for us. How are we doing on time? Pretty good? Okay.
Sorry, I
That's
just
our rice
realized
steam.
no one else but you could hear me say that. We're doing good.
I love it. We're live here today. So this is the steamer we bought from ETA Group. Got this in 2018. So for 4 years, we were using a handmade steamer, and it worked, but it just wasn't as consistent. Consistency is really, really key. I would suggest if you're going to do some commercial brewing, you really, really seriously look at steaming rice. Um, so in the beginning, we would weigh our rice before we steamed it, and weigh our rice after I steam it. You want to always make sure that you're picking up the same amount of moisture. You do not boil rice, you steam rice for making sake. This is really probably one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people make when they're getting started. And you can use those Chinese multiple tiered steamers, pots, but you really need to make sure that you do it consistently and you need to use a cloth. Dummy rice is always really helpful. It just helps take down the moisture at the bottom of the rice, and that can always create problems for you, especially in koji making. Um, Everyone always asks me, how do you know if the rice is done? I don't know if this is right or wrong, but this is what every single brewery I've worked at in Japan showed me is doing the rice test. Um, First, is the rice sticky? Sticky rice can mean two things. One, the talc is too high, and it has to do with you didn't wash it good enough, or it is just naturally coming that way. Table rice is always, always, always so much more sticky than sake rice. If you use real Yamada Nishiki or Omachi, your hands are not going to stick to the rice. That's a real indicative trait that you can see with table rice. Too moist? Yes, it can get really moist on the sides. So that's why I say use dummy rice as much as you can. Brown, burnt rice, that also can be alleviated if you're actually using dummy rice. And make sure that you've got the cloth so the rice is not actually touching the sides of the metal pans. Um, uh, can you use brown or burn rice? I would not. I would really suggest not doing it. You absolutely cannot use it for making koji. It just will not work. Okay. Um, Mochi. This is what I was always taught. So you take a handful of rice, smush it in your hand, keep rolling it around, rolling it around, rolling it around, keep pushing, pushing, pushing. And what you want to see is you get an actual ball of rice, but you should see the integrity of each kernel of rice still there. If you're not seeing the integrity of the kernel and it's turning into just paste, you've overcooked it. Shape does matter.
Hey, Jake, really quick, when you said brown rice, I just want to make sure we're clear on that. You're not referring to brown rice. You're referring to rice that is like burnt, crispy, like at the bottom of your koshiki, so to speak.
Yes, you are 100% correct. I'm not
Just making
talking
sure,
about.
because I know people are going to
Yeah.
say, wait, you can make koji with brown rice. Well, of course you can, but not this kind of brown rice. Yeah.
No, I'm talking about when you're cooking it. If you cook it, if you put white rice in and you take it out and it's brown because of the cooking process, that you cannot. I mean, yeah, I suppose you probably could try, but you're
Yeah.
not going to get the quality of koji that you want. Absolutely
Yeah.
not.
And
And it will.
just as the throwback here, because you already said it once, and I just because now you're talking about it and you're saying cooked rice on there, just as the disclaimer for everyone who's listening from this point on forward, like cooking means steaming. We don't mean like on a stove in the water. You're not soaking. So if you hit 185% moisture in your rice, you are doing it wrong. It's like it's indicative of that, and it's just a question of it. So anyway, I want to make sure we call that out a second time and really give some weight to that steaming, not
No
Yeah,
boiling.
boiling. No boiling. Yeah.
Boiling.
All right.
Yeah, if you're picking up more than 40% moisture gain, you're overcooking, you're over steaming, you're over boiling your rice. So those are kind of key. And again, depending on what you're going to be doing with the rice between koji and your tome, you've got some leeway. Koji, you have least amount of leeway you can possibly have there. You really want to make sure you're hitting your numbers as best you can, because otherwise it creates all kinds of problems down the road there. So you want to watch that for sure. I got some videos here. Everyone always loves these videos. You asked me what I didn't think about is the noise all this machinery makes. I don't know if you guys could hear that, but it actually is a lot of noise. And it's a lot of steam. So yeah, that's kind of fun. So that's our steamer. And we love it. Absolutely love
Yeah.
it. I recommend it to
You know,
everybody.
Jake, you brought something up there, the noise, and it's actually probably a good thing to throw out here for the people that have not worked in a commercial setting, which is um, those noises you become familiar with. And and if for some reason now you have a different, you don't have a boiler in yours. You have the, I guess it's a boiler, but it's within the machine itself that's
Right.
it's boiling water. Um, if you have a boiler and you're steaming and you're listening to that boiler go on the whole time, and you're off on the other side of the brewery doing God only knows what, CIPing a tank or getting some ready, and you no longer hear that awful noise, that is like indication number one. Something has gone horribly awry in your brewery. You must seek that out immediately. So I just thought it was great because you brought up the noises, but these noises, as awful as they are sometimes, are extremely useful in the overall process of not over soaking something, not over steaming something, not over, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So, um, sorry for
No,
jumping
you're
in and throwing off your vibe. I thought
no.
that's such a critical thing when you mention noise.
But you did make me think. You are using all your senses. So someone asked me the other day, can I smell the difference between the different Cal
Mm,
rows, or can I smell the difference between sake rice? I smell the difference from everything. I'm always smelling it. Always tasting it. So when I pull the rice out, which you can see right there, I'm tasting it. You want to taste
mm,
it. So Eda rice tastes different than Sun Valley rice tastes different than Sequoia rice tastes different. They all taste different. Good or bad, I'm not sure in terms of eating, but sake rice should be bland. If it has a lot of flavor, that's usually some kind of table rice. So those flavors are creating different flavor profiles in your sake. And you don't
yeah,
think about it, but that's something you should start paying attention to, is like, what am I smelling? Also,
yeah,
you can tell, or I can tell, how old the rice is by what odors are coming off when you're cooking it,
mm,
how long it's been sitting around in storage. So those are the things you want to get in tune to understand, okay, where's this rice been sitting? How long has it been sitting? What am I doing? How am I doing this?
yeah,
And again, we'll talk about that before, but we're producing sake all year round, but we don't mill our rice until we need it. So being able to keep the rice in brown and then mill it
mm,
when we need it, that allows us to hold on to that moisture inside there. Whereas you turn it to white, you're losing moisture from that point on. And then by the
yeah,
end of the year, you have a lower moisture rice kernel. So you then have to change your soaking time. So there's all these little pieces that just build upon each other. And
yeah.
again, 10 years of doing this, you kind of learn it by secondhand. You don't even think about it. So this is great that you brought me in to ask me these questions so I can rethink stuff.
I know. Well, that cooking thing when you said about the smelling it, even just the tasting it, that was one of the suggestions when we were trying to grow our own variety of rice down in New Orleans, and trying to compare between different rice varietals and different polishing rates. The thing that I think we were talking with Ida Group, Kono-san or something like that, and he was like, "Well, have you actually just steamed this rice like in a little rice cooker, and like just don't cook it, but steam it like in there and taste it. Just taste your rice, see what
Yeah.
it tastes like, and get that idea of how much flavor are you getting just on that alone." So I think it's great, Jake. Um,
Well, I think some of the brewers that taught me in Japan, they weren't so much chemists like my daughter in analyzing everything, very analytical. A lot of them would say, just stick your hand in it. How does it feel? What's it,
right, right.
smell it? I mean, it's more cooking concept than it is actual, because you're actually brewing something to eat, drink.
Yeah,
So it's actually you're a chef. You don't get detached from it and think you're making some other animal.
Right.
And again, with the same with while it's fermenting, what is the noise that it's actually making when it's releasing those little bubbles of CO2? What noise do you hear? I mean,
Yeah.
so I was really fortunate that I had brewers that would say, stop, listen to what you're hear what's making the noise. That's that tank over there. So
Yeah.
that definitely makes a difference. It's fun too.
All right. I'm going to let you get back on track. I've distracted you a
Okay.
little.
No. So this is my point about how many times I touch the rice. I spend a lot of time touching the rice. Um, and you're sticking your head over the top of it, so you're smelling the rice all the time anyway. So you should just get familiar with that. That makes a big difference. Um, so this is my daughter. She's doing the koji. We're taking it, cook the rice, bring it into the clean room, and she's going to sprinkle on the koji spores. I brought this one up because I've seen a lot of people ask me, how many koji spores percentage do you use for the rice? So we're doing about 30 kilos of rice to about 8 grams of koji spores. Okay, so it's very, very small. So you really want to be careful with over inoculating the rice. Yes, it does change for us based upon the rice varieties, but you're not over. You put too much in there, you're going to change the whole flavor and texture of it. So just real quick here. Nothing special, nothing fancy, but it just gives you an idea of what you're doing there in terms of the rice and the koji. This is Noriko. She's taking a look at the last pass, pulling out the koji. So this is the koji, seeing what we've got. Yeah, it looks like koji. Again, she's the master. She's been doing this for 14 years, so I rely on her massively to do this. So that's where I kind of come down to the end here to talk about some discussion questions. What
Yeah.
people like.
Why don't we
What have
jump
you
into those?
covered?
We
Please.
got a whole bunch of these, and then we have some other questions that have come in while we've been talking. So let's see. Let's start off with the basics here because I know like you just put up some, and we had already kind of thought through there was a few. So just on the high level mistakes, why don't we talk about over soaking rice? Because I would say this is probably the most common mistake that gets made, especially when people are starting out. Oh, the quick disclaimer. I have this in big old yellow on mine. Look, to everyone who's watching these, every brewery that we've had come on here already, and everyone we're going to have on, and extend that out to every brewery you'll ever go to. Everyone's doing it differently. I'm calling this the Bonryu disclaimer. And as a result of which, when someone gives okay, this is what you do, this is how you do that, I think it's just important to note that's at the very least, that's like in this case, Jake's experience, or it's my experience or someone else's. And you might hear someone else say it differently. And the thing is, there is no exact right answer to this. There is science, but there's so many ways to arrive at that same science. So I think it's just an important thing that we'll probably go through in the future, trying to call out the Bonryu disclaimer, because I think it's important for everyone to think like that. There's always a different way of achieving the same goal. So with that being said, let's talk about soaking rice. You over soak your rice. Um, what do we do at that point? You pull it up, you weigh it, and you go, oh my God, I was supposed to hit 133 and I'm at 138, right? Or 140, even worse.
Yes, we all have done that, and we will all do that. So in the early days, we used to use the blue plate test, where you put the rice onto the blue plate until you can't see it until it's opaque, and take the time. We don't do that anymore so much. We pretty much just do a small amount and see how long it takes to actually get it. We're getting kind of complacent because we have our own rice. We know it how it's going to work, so we have pretty much know. I'll go for 10 kilos at the first round and say I know this rice from before is going to go there. and then I hit 140. So what do? I stick it back into the dryer, turn the dryer back on, and see if I can get it down a few degrees. If I can get it down a few degrees, great. Most of the time you can't. So now you're in the dilemma. Since you're doing koji and you've got one of three 10-kilo bags, what do? Do you go back and say, okay, I'm going to adjust the time, so I'm going to get 133 for the other two? That can be dangerous because now you've got one really out of whack rice bag versus the other two that are in sync. So then you have to make a call. Do I throw away that one that's out of whack and just do three? With koji, we would throw away that one bag and just do three closer to the weight. If I'm doing tome, I wouldn't worry about it at all. I would just go for it and say, yeah, tome, you can have plenty of room to make those kind of errors and still be fine. It's not an issue. So it really depends on where you are in the process, which is always, always, always the more delicate. You want to hit as close to those numbers as possible. But if I hit 134 and then I hit 132 and then I hit 133, I'm going to go for it. If I hit 138 and then I hit 120 and then I hit something like that, really have to think if I'm doing koji, would I do that? Probably not. It's just too important for the whole batch. And again, it comes down to money, time. So those are my big denominators. So if I'm making a commercial batch, that's quite a bit of money, quite a bit of rice is coming on after that 10-kilo bag. So I would probably go that route, if that makes sense.
It does. I think in the case of that, sometimes it's better off. What I have noticed is that, especially like on a homebrew scale, when someone's working with, they may let that sit out for a while. I have seen people try to dry out their rice more, and I think it's a dangerous thing because, for one, the structure of that rice is changed just by the nature of there being more water in it, first of all. And as it starts to come back to a drier rice, it's going to dry differently than if you had not soaked it. So like there's another thing I've seen happen too, like someone under soaks rice. And so they're like, oh shoot, I'm at let's say 128, but they want to be at 133. And so what they'll do is they'll take that rice and dip it back into the water to hit it. And totally can work, but you're going to shoot so quick from what you were at 128. You might hit 135 in a quarter of the time you expected it to, but that's for under soaking rice. Just on the strict, going back to this, so to reiterate what you said, essentially, if you go way over, we're talking like, let's give it some numbers. If you're over by like 4 to 8%, like way over, at that point, you just got to kind of like make the decision. If you want this to be consistent, you probably got to toss that or, set it aside for body rice or something like that, which I'll come back to in 1 second. But if you're only within a couple points, probably okay, up or down, to work with that.
Yes. And again, so many of these things are person specific. So if I gave Noriko rice that was off, I would tell her it's off, and she will wait in the koji room to take down the moisture, and she will do some things to make it work. If you're just getting started, that's really hard. I would say take the hit, do it again.
We've when you do the Ueda koji method, one of the big things is lowering your moisture rate in your rice till it hits a certain point. But typically, you're doing that in a very sterile room, I guess not sterile, sanitized room, and there is some known understanding of where you're starting at moisture-wise and where you're trying to go to. I have I've not seen as many people do like a drying situation on a bed, but that's just me. I haven't witnessed it either. So this might be one of those things that we can continue talking about and asking people. Did you ever have to take 5% moisture off your rice? Like, how often do you do that? Is it worth it? But I think it's good to get your experience in this and say that if it's going to koji, don't just you got, as you said, production timelines are important and you got to keep moving. And I think that's one of the things, especially as people scale, to always keep in mind. Production doesn't wait. So you know, you're going to have a Shubo, you're going to have a Soe, you have other Koji that's going to be coming up behind this Koji. So you just got to keep moving. So we'll stick with that for now. I think it's a good answer to it. Um, let's move on. It's kind of similar, but it's a little bit different. What happens if you over steam, overcook your rice? So your soaking was fine, but then you kind of went over, and the texture starts falling apart. Um, is this going to fall into a similar bucket, or is this something that can be adjusted in your mind?
Again, that comes into the mochi test. So if you squish your rice into your hand and you've got a paste over there, not going to happen unless you're making Yamahai or you're making Kimoto. But yeah, I would not use that. If you've overcooked it that much, if you overcook it, you for some reason you overcooked it, but it still stays into the whole kernel. You can still see the kernel. You're fine. Go for it.
Okay. Yeah. What about this might be important. Your steamer. We did talk a little bit about dummy rice, and some things like that being used in the bottom. Um, we're probably this is way too technical to get into saturated versus unsaturated steam and things like that. But for most people that I've seen, especially in the West, most people are not able to control the saturation of their steam. So they're just dealing with, I am boiling, and there is some level of pressure going through the rice pack and then dissipating into one atmosphere, and yada yada yada. So there's not so much a situation where you're dealing with hyperheated steam or high pressurized steam. It is just steam coming up. Um, and you're in that situation, right? You're not There's no pressurization going on in the chamber below yours as well, right? But you also have a situation where that you don't have to use dummy my anymore, because yours, correct, that in your current setup you don't have to use dummy my
Oh no,
anymore,
we always use dummy wine.
oh, you do still use it? Okay, sorry. different
More important,
different people I talk with.
no, more importantly, if I'm using the shumai
Yeah,
steamer, you really got to use dummy mite, and you got to
yeah,
try to dummy mite up on the sides a little bit, so you're actually placing the rice inside there, because those are aluminum. Aluminum conducts heat differently than stainless steel, so then you get all
sure.
kinds of problems on top of that. But you're making me think again. One of the biggest pieces I see is people actually put a lid on top of their steamer. Don't put
Yeah,
a metal lid on top of your steamer. You need the rice steam to get out, so you have to use a cloth. A cloth is
yeah,
really, really key because it lets the steam travel through the rice, not saturate the rice. So
right.
that's a key piece. So those are two pieces you really need to have: the dummy mite and the cloth on top there.
Yeah, and it's funny too. Like, even at home now, when I'm doing a home brew, I manage to get that canvas on top pretty taut. Like, it does have that nice. You can smack it with a finger, and it gives you a nice bounce to it, a nice drum sound, if you will. And I think that can give you some element of, hold some pressure and heat within the chamber, but the entire time, tons of steam is coming straight out of there. There is nothing impeding its pass other than a little bit of that. Um, so this brings up that next piece of it, though. So I think I put it in here. So as you're steaming, there's going to be all these areas in some cases where rice doesn't steam properly, and it actually, maybe there's a little dripping coming down in some areas, and so people will open up their koshiki or their pot at home, and they'll see little white areas in the rice, where the rice is not that glassy steamed appearance. It is in
Mm-hmm.
fact opaque. It is white, it all the way around, like a brilliant white, and clearly that is overcooked, literally cooked rice, where water has been condensating. What should they do with that, assuming this is koji bound?
I mean, you're going to get that. I, every brewery I've ever been to has that problem. So
Yeah.
it's not home brewers that have that problem. The
Oh no, totally.
problem
This is
with
across the board. Yeah.
Yeah, the problem what happens when you're at home brewing is the percentage of that rice that you're now taking
Mm,
into koji. So I mean, we probably have like 1% or a quarter of a percent with what we're making. But if you've got 50% of your rice has that, you're not going to make koji. You're not going to do it. If you've got
okay.
under 10%, use it. You'll be okay. But you start getting above 10%, you got a problem. You got a problem,
Yeah.
and that's where you got to look at your dummy mind. You got to look at some other things. What I thought you were going to ask, and I was reminded about this by with Noriko. Um, in the early days, we had rice that we bought that was 2 years old, and it just did not cook. So we actually cook it 50 minutes, and
Mm.
then we actually took hot water, steamed water, and poured it over the top because it was not cooking. It was not absorbing water at all. And I would
You're
not
kidding
recommend,
me.
but it actually did work. I would avoid having to do this, but if you're at that point where you just cannot get the rice to cook, I've seen some other brewers do this. It does work, but it's really scary as shit.
Damn it, Jake. I'm gonna have so many people message me now. What's Jake's method for boiling water over the rice? I'm trying it. It's not working.
No,
Um,
it's not an easy thing. Yes, and it
please don't
really is
approach.
very
Don't
specific.
try this at home.
Don't try this at home.
Uh, yeah, no, but I think the 10%'s good. I will say, uh, those areas when people bring them into the koji room, if it is too wet, you will find those areas are the ones that are going to stick a lot to your hands, and they're going to be the ones where the most growth or least growth, depending on how much water is happening. So you'll end up with these pockets. The one thing I've done in a commercial setting a few times is the next morning after on koji specifically, when you're breaking up the pack, the mountain, whatever you want to call it, and you find little mochi that next day. Um, I've seen those removed from the batch and placed right into the tank. Like this is not going to make it to koji, but it still is rice. We don't want to get rid of it. It goes into a thing and it gets placed in the tank. Um, Curious, do you do that? Do you keep the little chunks of mochi that are probably going to become hard compado or
What we've done is to go upstream. So we actually probably massage our rice more than most people. So
okay?
we'll massage it quite a bit before it goes in the koji room. Then if the heat's going down too much, we'll go into the koji room and we'll massage it again. And when I say massaging, we're just trying to move those kernels so that they're more evenly spread. The problem most people have is they've got these big clumps of these white
Yeah.
things and they kind of just all stick together and you can't get it apart. But if you gently can get them to spread apart so that they're in more of the general rice, you're going to be better
Sure.
off. If at
Yeah.
the end of the day you've got clumps that are just like big white clumps,
Yeah.
it's not much you can do at that point.
Yeah.
um,
All right. We it's I mean these are difficult things. I think there's some experiential aspect of that. Like when someone picks it up and they go to play with it, I have found that some of those clumps when I'm on the cooling phase, if I mix those in with drier clumps, sometimes it will
yeah,
relieve the problem. But if I'm simply just going in and leaving those, they're either going to be a giant chunk of hard rice or it's going to end up being it might dry out. It really depends on how much water. So I think that is the experiential thing of you got to just see what that texture feels like.
no,
Uh,
and
yeah,
I'm lucky because Noriko goes back and forth, and she's talked to a lot of people about this. And again, what you said in your disclaimer, it really is each person by each person. And
yeah,
having some clumps of rice is always going to be there, and it doesn't really detract unless it's a bigger percentage. So you're looking at your percentage overall when you're looking at the whole totality of it. So I would not suggest people start throwing away half of their koji rice or portions of their koji rice, especially if you're just getting started. I would see how it works because that can get expensive
yeah.
and time consuming.
Yeah, and I definitely wouldn't throw it out. I would say like what I had seen is if it's really bad in like certain areas where you're like, oh, that just is mushy. You can't even hold it without it just be like falling apart. Like I see
Yeah,
nothing
get
wrong
rid of
with
that.
taking that and putting that to the side. And this actually brings up a question I'm going to move up to now because um it's come up a number of times. I've personally done it. I've seen it done in commercial setting, in a homebrew setting. We've even thought to recommend it for kakemai body rice, which is let's say you're not ready to actually do your shubo or your let's say a soe edition, whatever, but your koji is being made. So you have a 2 days between now and, or at least 2 days between now and when you're going to use it. Let's say you do have some of that rice that just isn't right, or maybe you're trying to cut down on time and you steam a bunch of rice in advance. Here's the question. For kakemai related rice, I'm specifically counting out koji. Do you think it's okay to freeze your rice so that you can, or refrigerate it so that you can reintroduce that rice later into the tank as kakemai?
Wow.
I didn't expect that reaction.
Oh, good God.
I'm talking to the rice guy over here.
Please don't ever freeze your rice. Please, please. You can freeze your koji. Absolutely. No problem with that.
Sure.
If
Sure.
you freeze your cooked rice, you change the whole texture of the rice. You really do. You massively change the texture. I thought you were going to ask me, can I soak my rice and leave it in the walk-in cooler for 2 days before I start cooking it? Yes.
Yeah.
Can I cook the rice and leave it in the walk-in cooler? I would highly suggest you don't do that. It
You and I are
changes the
gonna have we're gonna have a side conversation of this with a mutual friend after this, and we're gonna see where we all stand after the conversation. I think this is the Bon Ryu part of this. So I'm curious. So what you're talking about the actual change of the rice. So in your have you tried this? I guess is the first question. Have you tried to freeze it? Because I notice it does change. Like it can get that like crispy, almost hard structure of this. But have you ever done it on a batch?
I have
No.
never frozen rice. I've asked brewers when I'm in Japan in the middle of winter, what happens if the rice gets frozen, and they say
Yeah.
that we throw it away. So
Really?
yeah.
Well, that's so interesting. All right, this is gonna be our own frozen rice challenge. We're gonna get people to attempt this. Um,
Well, then
I
how do you
I
warm it up enough to be able to put it into the tank?
depends. If it's
I mean,
frozen, you just
maybe
put it
you're in
right
a
in the tank.
warmer climate than me, but I mean, my room is 18 degrees, and I cooked rice like I saw you. You saw me this morning. So to get it back up to 18 degrees after it's been frozen, it's gonna have to sit out for like 2 days.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll have to go over this. This will be we'll table the topic for now and come back to it. But mind you, I'm not against frozen rice. I'm not. This will be a debate we're going to go into, Jake.
Okay, Uncle Ben.
Not that kind of rice. Okay. Overcooled rice. Overcooled rice. Did I already mention this one? You cool it too far. Is it? Do you just put it in anyway? Like you're mashing in. Let's avoid koji for the time being because we
Yes.
can always adjust that in the room. But let's say we overcooled the rice and it's too cold to be going into the tank. Is that okay?
So you've got two problems. So we first need to delineate if it's overcooled rice or it's been rice that's been have a fan on it to cool it down and you've gone past your temperature. So that gives you two problems. One, you've destroyed the humidity or the moisture in there. So you've got that problem. And then you've got the rice too cold. So those two are really, really dangerous. So a lot of people use fans to cool the rice, which is fine, but you have to be really careful not to take all the moisture out of the rice. So that's more important than actually cooling it down too much. If it's cooled down too much, depending on how much water you have to add to which addition, you can add warm water. You can add warm water to do your tables to make sure that your rice temperature and your tank temperature and your water temperature all come in balance. Those are the only three areas you have. But if you reduced your moisture content, that makes life a lot more complicated. And yeah, that you
Okay.
want to avoid.
I think that's a really good one, actually. To me, that actually falls into a similar category to what I think your fear of frozen rice is like. It's like you are doing things to that rice that a normal cooling process would not be doing. So we can get more into that some other time too, because that's another one. You mentioned handling the rice a bunch. Is there over handling?
Oh yeah, koji is probably the most place people overhandle. They will massage it too much. They'll break it down too much. They'll really mess around with it too much. You want to go pretty quickly with your koji rice and not handle it too much. Kakimai, it's a question of where you're overhandling it. Again, the tome, you want to get it broken down into as small kernels as possible. Get rid of the clumps. It just saves you from stirring it, and it saves you time. It also helps in the cooling process. It also depends on the rice variety. So some rice varieties just do not really work well. Um, I talk about where you're handling rice. So one, you're handling the rice for us when we're washing the rice. That's where you can really manhandle that rice a lot, if that's a word I can use. You really can scoop it up a lot while you're doing it. But if you've already soaked the rice, you want to be careful not to handle it too much because you can damage it there. Once you've cooked it, in the beginning you can handle it pretty good. As it gets, you know, more close to room temperature, you want to be careful to do not handling it too much because you can actually damage the rice. But hopefully you've got the clumps away by that point. And again, it's a kind of a thing you sense after you've done it enough times or you've seen people do it enough times. So it's not an easy answer. Sorry.
Yeah, no, no, no. I mean, look, I hadn't even brought up like Kimoto or anything like that because we're not going there today. There's just too
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah, I know. But because that, what is it? What is that? Ikimeshi. Am I getting that right? Ikimeshi. The the wrapping of rice into like a package, essentially letting it cool very slowly over there.
We don't do that.
We're not going there. But obviously there's lots of different things when it comes down to cooling rice, how you cool rice, what's it being used for, what's the point of it? Do you want this rice to melt very slowly? Do you want it to melt very quickly? Um, this is a topic that if you have anything on this, I know you said we talked a lot about table rice and polishing. Do you have any advice for people that, especially for our European brothers and sisters over there who are trying their best with no polished rice? But they want to make sake, they want to get into this, and until a polisher shows up, I've heard on the wind one might be headed there at some point. But until it does, um, how can they possibly steam their rice or soak their rice to arrive at a more soluble rice? That's something that's actually going to break apart in a good way for them. Whereas if they were using, sake rice, that might be a bad idea to do this to it. Are there procedures you can offer them or some sort of advice in that regard?
So I'm going to break my normal tradition here. Is we've actually worked with a polisher, rice miller that actually will take it through two, three, four times for us to do testing. So I will actually test rice because I can't afford to send it to Ida or to Sun Valley and have it. That's a 2,000 pounds, a ton of rice that I need to do for one milling. So I need to find out if it's going to work. So we actually do some of that. You want to make sure that your rice has been dried correctly. So if you're just buying rice from the regular farmer who's dried it in 24 hours, you can't do that. But if you've actually dried your rice correctly and so the outside is hard with the right moisture on the inside, you can send it through your machine pretty safely if you got a miller who actually understands about heat. So those are
Oh,
the key.
sorry. I think you're answering a different question. The question was if you don't have polished rice, you're working with like
Right.
90% table rice. Yeah, sorry, did I? Were
No,
we
no,
on
no,
the
no.
same
I'm,
page?
I'm just
Okay.
saying I would go upstream because you can solve some of the problem there. When you're all the way downstream and you've got a 90% milled rice that you're trying to steam and turn into sake, it's a hit and miss in terms of
Yeah,
what quality of the rice you have, how
yeah.
much mineralization's in there. The oils are what's going to really impede you. So there's not much you can do about those off flavors other than talk to Todd about how you can filter them out at the end. You're
Sure,
really going to have
sure. So the off flavors aside, if we wanted to melt that rice better, do you have any opinion on like rice that is, let's say even you go up to 70 or 80% and you're like trying to do something that's a little bit more, most of the grain. Are you adjusting your steaming or your soaking in any way because of that situation as you go up in, say, my buai?
we don't adjust our time of steaming at all. We always do the
Okay.
exact amount. It doesn't matter what rice variety we have. Soaking is where most of the adjustment happens. If you've got low milled rate, you're probably not going to get your moisture you want. That's probably the biggest impact that you're going to have. And again, like you said in the beginning, a disclaimer: if you soak your rice for over 40 minutes and you're not getting any more percentage, you're pretty much done at 40 minutes. A warmer water, rice absorbs more. Colder water, rice absorbs less. Those are some just guidelines that are out there. I mean, I know people have different opinions on that. They'll soak their rice
Yeah.
for 2 days. It's not going to make a difference after 40 minutes. Really, you're not going to get that 10 more percent you want. You're going to stay pretty much the percent that you got. So,
Yeah, this is definitely a debated topic for sure. There's lots of people with very strong opinions on this. I would
oh
just
yeah,
encourage everyone who's trying to work through it, and I know there's people within the Discord that definitely talk about what they've been doing, the success they've had. Some people who've like built their own polishers at home and stuff like that, or have tried to do this. Like some of them have had great success. Others, I think, too many cracked grains, and they end up getting a high moisture uptake as a result of which. But yeah, it's to be seen. But I was just kind of curious to get your sense of what
no,
can
no.
be
Again,
done.
also, I just want to sorry cut you off. There is I'm looking at this from the perspective of a commercial operation. So
Yeah,
to have a rice sitting around on my curb for 2 days or even an hour,
yeah,
that's not. I can't do production that way. So
yeah,
that's it's that's my two
yeah.
cents.
No, it's good. All right, we talked about a lot of the initial things. Did you? I don't remember if you actually mentioned this. What had motivated you to work with Calrose specifically? Was it just like you were looking for the thing that was the most cost effective and what was like local within your area? You wanted to work with Calrose rice.
There was a couple of factors in that. So we didn't have any access to any sake rice. There was no Yamada. There was nothing available. I was talking to UC Davis about resurrecting that. So pretty much Calrose or Koshi Hikari, and I didn't like Koshi Hikari for certain other reasons. Um, but Calrose, I thought presented itself, and I talked to a couple other producers locally that were using Calrose and having some success. So I thought it was a good rice. What I like about Calrose now, after working with it, is it does present itself as for us an American flavor profile. So it does give us certain characteristics that I like. It does hold its moisture throughout the year really well, which is
Mm.
good for holding on to it for quite a while. And if it's dried correctly, it mills up fine. It really mills up fine. We lose not the broken and cracked rate is low. So those factors were one of the reasons, two of the reasons, three of the reasons why we decided to go with Cal Rose.
This brings up a really interesting question. I think it was JJ had asked, which was, so you're getting rice delivered. Are you getting it delivered in a super sack? Like for people that don't know what that is, that's like 1,000 kilogram sack, or are you getting it delivered in bags? And is there a preferred delivery method for the purpose of keeping your moisture rate relatively consistent
So
as it's
we
being
get it.
stored? Sorry, in storage. That's specifically related to how you store it.
Oh, in storage, it's brown and it's in the silo until we
Okay.
put it into a pack. Then it's taken to the first miller, which removes the husk and removes the brown. Then it's shipped over to whichever sake milling machine will do it. Then they put it into 50-pound sacks. And we like
Okay.
50-pound sacks here at the brewery because I have my wife and my daughter and myself. It's just easier to carry around.
Okay. And so is there anything in terms of the store? So you said it's brown rice at the farm in the silo in its dry state. Can you walk us through like if someone were in your situation where they were like having someone grow their rice, someone store it, in your experience, the ideal is to keep it in that form as long as possible, or to mill it and then have it shipped to you or stored in some climate controlled room. What are the storage conditions and how long do they stay there?
We don't have space here in San Francisco. I can't afford space and I can't afford the cold storage that would have to be in. You want to keep it
Yeah.
at 60 degrees or about, probably 50, 15 degrees centigrade. and it's got to be the right humidity and all that stuff. If you've milled it, if you leave it brown, I mean, leave it in the husk, you don't have to mess with it at all. It's natural. It's Mother Nature taking care of itself. So you want to leave it there until you're ready. So we call and say, okay, let's mill it. It gets milled down into brown or white, and then it gets shipped over to the sake milling machine. Then we come and we get 2 pallets. That's 4,000 pounds delivered to us, and we go through that.
Okay. Awesome. Um, so one of the questions that came in while we were on this, I'm just going to try to not butcher it while I'm saying it. Is there meaningful differentiation between Ginjo and Ginjo polish levels for, let's say, Calrose? Like when you're working with yours, are you seeing a substantial difference in those rice? And there's a few different ways to take this, so I apologize if I'm getting the intention of the question wrong. But when you're steaming or you're processing this rice, are you thinking large differences between 50 and 60% polish, or are you like processing those essentially the same?
So yeah, there's a couple pieces on that. So we only tried Daiginjo with Calrose once. We were not happy with the results, so we didn't do that again. If we're gonna make a Daiginjo, you're gonna go for one of the sake rice, so Yamanishiki Omachi, something like that.
Yeah.
Processing it differently. Um, so the soak time, all those things are different because of the rice. So those are already different. The cook time is the same. The koji making process, that's something you'd have to talk to Noriko. Yes, it is absolutely done differently. How quickly she's pushing the rice out to keep the layer and the temperature. How quickly the temperature is much more finicky with sake rice and daiginjo when you're doing koji. The tome and after, yeah. So daiginjo in the fermentation process is absolutely temperature difference. They're totally different. But again, that
Yeah.
has to do with also the yeast varieties that you're using. So you're usually using daiginjo yeast varieties. So it's those all impact it. But the actual way we handle the rice in terms of storing, cooking, no. Washing, yes. Koji, yes. Fermentation temperature, yes.
Between Ginjo and Daiginjo, your washing changes?
The soak time changes. The washing does not change.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we've set it up so it's always the same. We do 30 seconds worth of cleaning the rice, which is basically hydrating and getting rid of the clumps. We do 2 minutes of washing the rice, and then we do 1 minute of actually uh, rinsing the rice. That's always the same. The soak time is different.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. Someone made a question about. Okay, so when you have a year where the rice is harder, let's say the starch has been high temperatures all year, not a lot of cool evenings, and the rice is coming in just harder to work with. Japan's dealing with it. Everyone's dealing with this as climate is changing. Um, Disclaimer: climate is changing. And I'm curious, how do you adjust the process when it's a new season, new rice crop is coming in? Maybe it's not so much an adjustment, but what are the things you're doing as that new season rolls around to say, here's what we have to do to get that texture exactly like we want it?
This is a complicated question, and we're dealing with this quite a bit. So I'm very fortunate because I have 3 resources here that actually test all my rice before I ever get to me. I also have 2 resources in Japan that also will my secondary backup to take a look at it. So a lot of the rice that you're hearing about in Japan is chalk. So also here in California, the M201, 205, sorry, 205, no, 211 is having a chalk. Chalk is different than actual starch. So everyone gets that confused. The laymen talk about, oh, I can see something inside there. That must be starch. No, that's chalk. 99% of the time,
Right.
if it's table rice, you're looking at chalk. Chalk is terrible. It's a killer for us. So you really want to avoid that. And there's no way to avoid it if it's gone through the initial milling and come to the actual sake milling machines, and they will just make it the same way. It happens upstream when they're milling it from taking the husk off and turning it from brown to white. They have the ability to pull the chalks out. and that's where you get the chalks out. So that said, it's very expensive. If you have to use that rice, it's painful. There's no way around it. It's just painful because it's not consistent. So it can give you off flavors. You can under soak it when you think you've got a lot there, but you hold the rice, you bring it out of the cooler the day before, and you look at the bottom of the bucket, and you're like, wow, there's like a couple liters of water there. So weigh your rice again, all of a sudden you just lost, some percentage of your moisture gain. So those are the things you should recognize right away and say, oh, there's something wrong with this rice. Then you go back to the miller, back to the farmer, back to whoever it is to find out what their chalk rate was. And the chalk rate is dependent upon the location, and it also is dependent upon how warm the nights are. And the nights are getting warmer in Japan and getting warmer other parts. California actually still has cool nights, so we're still okay.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. That's awesome to hear. Um, yeah, this is a big topic. I'm actually surprised. You and I should sync up on this. I want to get more of your thoughts on chalk specifically. I've tried myself to find a number of crossovers between what is described as, say, for instance, shimpaku in Japan versus what is described as chalk here in America. And when you start looking at it from the broader grain standpoint of like vitreousness, glassiness, the other various parameters, a lot of this wording gets overlapped. I've seen blogs use chalk in Japan as a descriptor of shimpaku and vice versa. And so I'm really curious to connect with you more on this. It's something that I think for us to have that education and that like clarity of like what is going on here, it'd be
So
great to make sure that, yeah, go ahead.
just as a disclaimer there, you cannot tell the difference with your naked eye. So my miller has a machine that actually checks it out, and the computer looks at it and lets them know. And so it's not something. The same with the fractures. So people say, "Oh, I
Sure.
can see cracks in there." That could just be a natural. I don't know what they call it. It's actually not a physical fracture. It just is presented as an imperfection in the grain. So there's a lot of
Sure.
these things that get lost, and layman's looking at them saying, "Oh man, this is good. It's got a lot of shimpaku." When it's actually not shimpaku, it's chalk. Chalk is not
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing that up. One of the things that I put on the site at one point was even the different ways in which chalk can present itself in a grain, whether it's like something on a dorsal side or whether it's on the ventral side, and or if it's a little pocket within the grain or if it's in a centralized, how thick is that center? And all of these things come down to like how much you can polish a grain down, because if a grain has a giant white center of this vitreous, very patchy chalk, let's say, and you try to polish it, you're going to end up with a ton of broken grains. Anyway, this is a topic for another time. I just think it's a fascinating one that needs to be explored a lot more. Um, how do you prepare rice when it does not appear to dissolve well? Similar question, but kind of at a particular range. So you start to brew your first couple of the season with new rice, and you start to look, and you're like, oh, this is not dissolving. Do you just adjust within your ferment, or do you go back for the next batch and actually adjust how you're steaming, how you're soaking?
It really depends on the variety of rice. It also depends on the time of the year. It also depends on the numbers. Am I still getting the sugar that I expected? Am I getting too much alcohol, not enough alcohol? So all those things get put into there. And I hear this a lot in terms of, we're looking for the melt. We're not looking for the melt. We don't have the melt. And I think that may be a little bit different from my point of view. The melt is how much of the lees I have to deal with when I've done my clarification. So
Mm,
what I'm looking for in the fermenting is I'm looking for the numbers that mean that I've got fermentation and I've got sugars and I've got enzymes moving in the right direction. So I'm looking more at that. If the
right.
rice is just a solid cement and you're on day 45 and you can't get it to move, that's a whole nother problem.
Are there any high level, like, let's say brute force? If someone was like, "Oh man, my rice is not melting," do they, what I've often thrown out there for a lot of people, and it has had a positive effect, is either to adjust the fermentation ratios, like lowering your water or something like that, or even before your yeast has fully propagated in the tank, even keeping those temperatures a little higher because it will start to melt the rice. But that's in the tank. Um, you even said, right, you're going to hit a certain cap of water that rice is going to uptake at some point. So does further steaming help? Does putting that rice in warmer rather than trying to bring it in help in your experience?
No, in my
Okay,
experience, they do not help. If you're down to the wire, there are enzymes you can throw in. I'm not the enzyme experts. You have other connections for those people.
sure,
We don't, have to deal with that, fortunately.
yeah,
But again, I'm looking when you say not melting. What's why do you want it to melt? So the question is, what's the melt you want? What you're really looking
sure,
for is, am I producing the sugars I need at the same ratio that my yeast is growing? Or is the
right,
yeast not growing? So then, if the yeast is not growing, that's other elements that you do. Add water, take the temperature down so the koji has time to actually melt or interact with the kakimai. I mean, so those are the only places you really can adjust that when you're in the
sure,
fermentation process. But again, it's for us, it's really just those key two elements: is, am I getting too much sugar, or I'm not getting enough sugar? Am I getting alcohol too soon, or am I not getting any alcohol, or am I getting too much alcohol? Those are the where you have to start adjusting. If you're melting, if you're actually seeing that the rice is disappearing, you've got old rice, and that's a different issue.
mm. If you're seeing that the rice is disappearing, in other words, the grain itself is
If the grain
dissolving too
itself is
quickly.
dissolving too quickly, that means you've got old rice.
Mm. All right, more things for us to throw on the deeply research and produce a paper on topic. What are there any specific mistakes someone can make that are going to lead to off flavors? That's a broad question. I totally know, but are there any things that you could think of that you would specifically say, oh yeah, if you're gonna, I'm even trying to think of which topic specifically I'd throw at you for this one, but it was a question asked and specifically because they were like, well, if you do have defects, that you're are there defects that you are trying to avoid by processing the rice in one way or the other? So I guess this is sort of a general question of um, when you're thinking through the process, are there things you're like, well, I don't want to do that because that might lead to. Um, does any of that come to mind?
I guess, again, these are all just rules of thumb. It's always, again, it has to deal with koji versus kakimai and things like that. The rule of thumb is, it's better to be a little under moisture than over moisture. Over moisture tends to lead you down paths you don't want to go. Um, Again, these are big, broad brushstrokes on this subject.
Yeah. I
Uh,
know we only got an hour and a half total to try to cram a whole bunch of knowledge, and I think so far you've done a great job. In fact, we're I'm going to be we're calling it right around here anyway. So unless you have specific things you're like, okay, I actually would mention this. We could wrap it up here soon. I'll just take a look quick here and see if there's anything else.
I mean, my biggest takeaway is, uh, do some documentation. Just take that 5 minutes and write down some of the basic numbers you're doing, and try to develop a process. And even if the process isn't performing the way you want, get familiar with that process so that when you change the process, you know exactly where your changes are. So many people will say, that's not working. They'll go to another direction, another direction, another direction. Then you have nowhere to know where you've gone wrong or what you've changed can help. So change one thing at a time, write your documentation, and then research what you've done, or take a look at what you've done. Give yourself some retrospect on what you've done.
I love that. There was one thing on here that someone asked, and given the fact that you did bring it up, I think it's interesting. So you have a lot of different. It is a little bit broader of a question than simply within rice, but I suppose there's something to that. So you have a lot of different SKUs, and you have rice that's coming in. I'll try to wrap this into rice. Um, as many SKUs as you have, this person was curious how you think about sake regarding like the development window, age specifically. Like you've made the sake, this one's gonna be, gonna age quicker or slower. Yeah, this generally, like, how do you think about your production process throughout the year when you're considering rice coming off the farm? Which maybe if you're doing a daiginjo, do you do that earlier in the year? Uh, um, are there? I guess that this is again trying to interpret a question, but are
No,
there any?
that's a rolled up lots of questions inside there. Yes, we're always thinking about the production. Production is key to our whole process. With 16 SKUs, we're always having to navigate what gets put into production and when it's put in production. Um, Rice, we work with one, two, three, four different varieties of rice. So those will incorporate into different sake, but 99% of the sake that we're using our rice that we're growing for that same variety. So the anniversary sake, that's our Yamahai. That's a Daiginjo. That's, we had to get that in from somebody else because we don't grow Daiginjo. I mean, Yamahai. No, sorry, Yamada Nishiki. Sorry, my throat's going, my brain's gone. But so yes, if you're going to age the sake, we always put our sake into a bright tank, hold it there for 10 days, do the clarification, and if we're actually going to pasteurize it, we'll put it in the cooler for a minimum of 3 weeks to 3 months. So we're always thinking about that, and that's how much space that's taking up, and what do we want to do. We actually do an aged sake. So we have an all koji sake that we do every 3 years, and we hold on to it for a year, then release it. And we just released our 5 year all koji. That's the only one that will age. That just makes a big difference in terms of the quality. So
Sure.
yeah, you're always thinking about those things. Always, never goes away.
Jake, I want to thank you for being here today. This was great. We went a little bit over on time. I apologize for that. And we'll, I think you've offered a lot of great tips for people today, and hopefully this will generate even more questions. And well, I'll ping you with those at some point when you have time. After all your free time. Um, but yeah, so thanks so much for coming in, and
Pleasure.
to to everyone who will be joining us probably next month. I think we're going to stick on the cadence on this one. Not all of these are as specifically dated. We'll be doing a talk with Todd Bellamy. So far, the proposed title on this is Pressing the Issues of Post Processing. So a little bit of water chemistry up front, but a lot of this is going to be looking at post fermentation, pressing, filtering, pasteurizing, and more. So that should be really interesting. I think it's going to be a fascinating thing, especially Todd's background in beer and then coming over into sake. There's so much there that we can talk about, especially for people that are trying to connect the dots between what they have done in beer or meat or something else and now sake brewing. So, all right. Well, thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Jake.